Hello and welcome to the France 24 interview. Greek and French elections have both conspired this week to get Europe thinking and talking once again about the future of its currency. The fact that Greece seems to move ever closer to a messy exit from the euro never fails to focus the minds, of course, but also the election this week here in France of Francois Holland with his platform of more growth rather than austerity at a European level has also attracted a great deal of attention. Those are the subjects of our interview today. I have the pleasure of being joined by Jacques Attali, who is, of course, the former advisor of François Mitterrand, also former president of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Now, you've published today this article entitled "Let's Build a Europe of Growth." I translate loosely. You warn in it that if nothing changes, as things are, the end of the euro is simply a matter of time.
Exactly. This is very simple to understand because there is no example in history of currency surviving a long period of time without a state to back it, budget and a capacity to alleviate or reorganize the differences of competitivity between the different regions involved in the same currency. And we are in this situation. Maastricht Treaty was only an interim treaty. We knew that when we design it, and now the question is, are we going to build the next step or not? It's not a matter of utopia or political will or an architecture that is a kind of ideal dream. It's a matter of necessity.
But the fact that it has been built that way, Europe incrementally, you mentioned the Maastricht Treaty, other treaties, when it was obvious that a federal Europe was ultimately necessary, is down to the fact that there was simply no political will from the member states to go any faster on the political front. Do you think that today there's actually an appetite for more Europe rather than less, given everything that's happened?
It was always the case. When we moved from the common market to a single market, the single market could have been drafted in '58. It was not. And then when it was needed in the beginning of the '80s, it happened. And when we drafted the single act, we could also have decided the single currency. It was not. And then the single currency became obvious, and then we did it. Today, the question is, we are almost not yet at the climax of a crisis. And then either we'll come back and fail, and the euro will disappear, and then all our nations, including UK, which is not a member of the Eurozone, will suffer tremendously of a backlash and even a lot of recession. People say more than 25% drop in the GDP, followed by that. Or we will understand more clearly that there is a solution, which is to move to a next step and to use the resources of Europe for a very simple reason. Europe as an entity, the Eurozone or the European Union, has no debt, the entity. And therefore we can do three different things. One is to use the European Union as a common market for bonds and unify, collateralize all our national debt. That's a very bold solution that will give create a huge market for national debt and then create the resources. That's what the US did when we created the United States. The second move will be a smaller one, will be to say, okay, let's take only the Eurozone, let's have the Eurozone have a financial resource by a specific tax, and with this specific tax, finance the service of a borrowing of project bonds to finance investment. But we need countries to accept to have a transfer of fiscal revenues. And there is a third solution, which is not a second best, but a third best, which can be done tomorrow. There are in the budget of the Commission 50 billion euros not used because of the bureaucracy, etc. Forget about the reasons. And the Commission is keeping that money and don't want to use it and want to keep it for the use. It cannot use it. It will be so simple to transfer the 50 billion euro to the EIB as quasi-capital, because it cannot be real capital, because only states can invest, not quasi-capital, 50 billion. If you give this 50 billion to the EIB, the leverage of the EIB can be 15 or 20, give immediately the capacity of the EIB to finance 1,000 billion euro of projects, which is a huge possibility. Without no new debt, no new investment, no new taxes.
So this, as you say, then this idea of growth-based policy,
yeah.
a growth-based Europe, which is what you're calling for in Le Monde today. There are a number of different possibilities. Not a great deal of agreement for the time being, even amongst those who agree that that is the right thing to do, because there are a number of different solutions. But then there is the more fundamental problem of the Germans and whether Francois Holland, who's made growth this principal idea in his approach to Europe, whether he'll manage to convince them.
Well, I have no doubt. First, no doubt that it will happen. You know, a country is only interested by its own future, and that's normal. And then the question is, what is in for me, is the question that each politician is asking. And the Germans are beginning to understand. One, that they are isolated, not France, because whole of Europe is in favor of more growth, less austerity, and more Europe. Second, they will begin to understand that if the others are not growing, they will suffer also. And then if there are problems on bonds, national bonds in Spain and elsewhere, the German banks will be in terrible situation. And then they will understand that if the euro breaks up, the worst case scenario for Germany will be that, because Germany will suffer more than others. A lot of studies done by German banks, by Swiss banks, demonstrate that a breakup where the euro will be break into a German euro and a French euro, whatever, Italian euro, the German GDP will fall by 30%, 30%, which is huge and a disaster. Then Germany cannot afford to stay isolated, and I'm sure that before the end of this year that will happen. Of course, we know example in history since 30 centuries where nations commit suicide. Europe has committed suicide in 1948, in 1914, when the First World War happened in 1933, and in many other occasions. Europe can also, again, commit suicide. I do hope that it will not happen.
Now, you talk about the idea of this growth budget, the different possibilities for considering a sort of growth-based European future. All of them point towards greater federalism, a sort of political union,
yes,
as a result of all of this. What sort of shape would it have, and how would you sell it? How would one sell it to sceptical electorates?
Well, Europe is now seen, as I explained, and by many people, as a solution and not a problem. Then it's why I explained that federalism should not be seen as a kind of ideology. If you transfer the 50 billion to the EIB, it's a federalism de facto, not a political one. And actually, when the central bank on December 23rd decided to put 500 billion and then 500 over billion on LTRO, which is the way they put money on quantitative easing and the system, they create a kind of technocratic federalism. We have to move from a technocratic federalism to a political federalism. Step by step, that will happen. That will happen by the fact that each country, for instance, should, before they adopt, each parliament, before they adopt their national budget, they should hear at the views of the Commission and the views of the ECB president. The fact that we should have a meeting, a regular meeting of all the members of the Parliament, European Parliament, member of the Eurozone as a new institution, that will happen step by step. I am afraid that the crisis is going quicker than the diplomatic speed. That's the real danger.
That seems to have been the case so far. Do you think that the election of Francois Hollande will be enough to change that? Is he, you've worked for François Mitterrand, many comparisons have been drawn. Is Francois Hollande, does he have the stature? Is he capable of driving ahead these
Of course, yes. And as you know, François Hollande was working with me, and I picked him up to join the François Mitterrand team in '81. And he's an outstanding expert. He knows very well all these issues. And he will speed up the process of understanding that Europe is the solution.
It's going to take a great deal of political will, though, a political will that for the time being has not been around.
I don't think the political will be needed. The events will be enough. Catastrophe is ahead. And you don't turn the wheel of a car before you see the cliff. And the cliff is just ahead.
For Greece or for the euro generally?
For euro generally.
Jacques Attali, thanks ever so much for having been our guest on today's interview. That brings us to the end of the interview. We'll be back, though, very shortly for another. I do hope you'll stay with us. Goodbye.